The party unfolded inside a grand ballroom that looked as though excess itself had designed it. Crystal chandeliers hung low from gilded ceilings, scattering warm light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Waiters glided between guests with silver trays of champagne, their movements rehearsed and effortless. Designer gowns brushed against tailored suits as laughter floated through the air, soft, practiced, and just a little too loud. A jazz band played near the far wall, their smooth notes blending seamlessly with conversations about deals, investments, and influence. This was not a place meant for everyone. It was a gathering of the wealthy and powerful, business tycoons with familiar last names, socialites who measured their worth by who recognized them, and climbers who watched every smile and handshake like currency. Every detail of the night was about visibility. Being seen mattered more than being kind. Then she walked in. The woman at the entrance wore a simple dress in muted colors, neatly pressed but unremarkable. No diamonds sparkled at her ears. No watch glittered on her wrist. She carried herself quietly, shoulders relaxed, expression calm. In a room built to reward spectacle, her restraint made her almost invisible. She held her invitation carefully, as though it mattered, even if she suspected no one else would think so. For a moment, she paused, taking in the room, not with awe, but with quiet awareness. She was alone, and she knew she didn't belong to this world, yet she didn't apologize for existing in it. Eyes flicked toward her. Whispers followed. Assumptions settled quickly and cruelly, all without a single question asked. Unbothered, she walked forward and took an empty seat near the center of the room. She folded her hands in her lap and waited, unaware that this small, unclaimed space was about to become the most contested seat in the hall. They arrived late, exactly as people like them always did, confident that the room would wait. Conversations bent toward the entrance the moment they stepped inside. The man wore a sharply tailored suit that screamed money without needing a label, his posture loose with entitlement. The woman at his side was draped in elegance that bordered on excess. Perfect hair, immaculate makeup, a smile sharpened by years of getting her way. Together, they moved like they owned the evening. Their confidence was loud, though neither of them raised their voices. They greeted guests with exaggerated warmth, touching arms, exchanging kisses in the air, reminding everyone, subtly, relentlessly, of their importance. Compliments were handed out like favors, each one implying a debt. Laughter followed them, not because they were funny, but because people wanted to stay close to power. The wife's eyes swept across the room with open dissatisfaction. She wasn't looking for familiar faces. She was hunting for position. The best seat. The most visible one. A place that announced her status without her having to speak. When she saw the simple woman sitting quietly near the center, her gaze stopped. The judgment was instant. Her lips pressed into a thin smile as she leaned toward her husband, whispering something that made him smirk. To them, the woman was an error in the room's design. Someone misplaced. Someone who had wandered where she didn't belong. They didn't consider that she might be invited. They didn't consider anything at all. They approached with practiced ease, their expressions polished into something resembling politeness. Up close, the contempt was harder to miss. The wife tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning the simple dress, the empty hands, the absence of jewelry. Staff, perhaps. A forgotten guest. A +1 who had overstayed her welcome. The husband said nothing at first, only smiled, enjoying the moment. He'd seen this scene play out before. They both had. The wife spoke at last, her voice smooth and sweet, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. She gestured lightly toward the chair, as if pointing out a mistake on a tablecloth. "You'll need to move," she said casually. "That seat is taken." It wasn't a request. It never was. The woman looked up slowly, her expression calm but alert. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft and steady, carrying no challenge. She explained that the seat had been assigned to her, that she had followed the placement written on her invitation. She even offered a small, polite smile, as if courtesy alone might smooth the moment. The response was laughter. Not loud or cruel enough to draw reprimand, but light, dismissive, and deliberate. The wife laughed first, a melodic sound meant to charm the room, as though the woman had told an innocent joke. The husband joined in, shaking his head slightly, eyes glinting with amusement. Around them, a few nearby guests smiled along, grateful for entertainment that didn't involve them. People noticed. Glasses paused mid-air. Conversations thinned but didn't stop. No one intervened. Silence became permission. The wife stepped closer, her gaze openly critical now. She commented on the woman's dress, the way it hung too simply against her frame. She mocked the careful way she spoke, the faint trace of an accent she hadn't bothered to hide. Even her posture became a target. Too stiff, too unsure, too small for a room like this. Each remark was wrapped in a smile, sharpened by intention. The husband added his own brand of cruelty, his tone smooth and instructive. He spoke of how these events worked, of how certain seats were meant for people who contributed, who mattered. Money, influence, reputation. He listed them like qualifications. The implication was clear. The woman said nothing more. She held her composure, but her hands tightened around the edge of the chair. A breath caught in her chest before she released it quietly. She felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken agreement. At last, she stood. Without protest, without drama, she stepped away from the seat and offered it back. The couple accepted it without thanks. As she moved to the edge of the room, whispers followed her like a shadow, and the humiliation settled in, precise, controlled, and complete. The room exhaled and moved on as if nothing of consequence had happened. Conversations resumed in fragments, voices lowered just enough to suggest discretion rather than concern. Some guests avoided looking in the woman's direction entirely, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the contents of their glasses. Others offered quick, uneasy smiles to the couple now seated proudly at the center, nodding along as though approval were the safest currency available. A few laughed nervously, pretending the exchange had been playful rather than pointed. In this space, discomfort was easier to disguise as amusement. Power had a way of rewriting morality, bending it until cruelty looked like confidence and silence passed for good manners. No one wanted to be the person who challenged the wrong people. There were those who felt a flicker of guilt, a tightening in the chest, a quiet thought that something had gone wrong. They shifted in their seats, glanced once more at the woman standing alone. Then they told themselves it wasn't their place. They didn't know the full story. It was better not to get involved. Justifications came quickly and stayed. At the center of the room, the couple settled into the reclaimed seat as if it had always belonged to them. The wife crossed her legs, smiling broadly now, basking in the attention that returned so easily. The husband leaned back, satisfied, accepting handshakes and compliments as though he had just corrected a minor inconvenience. Near the edge of the room, the simple woman stood quietly, gripping her purse with both hands. She considered leaving. The exit was visible, only a few steps away. She had endured moments like this before, rooms that judged her before hearing her, people who mistook simplicity for weakness. But tonight felt heavier. The air itself seemed to press down, thick with unfinished business. A low, unsettling sense of foreboding settled in her chest, unspoken yet undeniable. This humiliation, she knew, was not the final act. A gentle tap against a microphone cut through the hum of conversation. The host stepped forward, smiling broadly, his tone light but deliberate. He thanked everyone for attending, offered a few polished remarks, then casually mentioned that one guest of honor had not yet arrived. The pause that followed was brief but electric. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Speculation rippled through the crowd like a current. Guests leaned closer to one another, voices dropping, eyes brightening with possibility. Whoever this person was, they mattered enough to delay attention, enough to be noticed by their absence. Excitement replaced discomfort, and the earlier incident was quietly buried beneath anticipation. The arrogant couple reacted at once. The husband straightened, scanning the room with renewed interest. The wife's smile sharpened, her eyes calculating. Proximity suddenly became everything. She adjusted in her seat, glancing around as if the right positioning alone might guarantee recognition. She whispered guesses to her husband, each name heavier than the last. A billionaire, perhaps. A political figure known to move markets with a sentence. An industry legend whose approval could open doors that money alone couldn't. Each suggestion carried weight, and with it, opportunity. The wife smoothed her dress, rehearsed expressions in the reflection of a nearby mirror, and subtly waved acquaintances closer, eager to be seen in the right circle when the moment arrived. Across the room, unnoticed by most, the simple woman stood quietly near the wall. She reached into her purse and checked her phone. One unread message glowed on the screen. She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened, steadied. She slipped the phone away and lifted her gaze toward the entrance, patient, certain. She wasn't lingering out of confusion. She wasn't waiting for instructions or permission. She was waiting for someone. The band faltered slightly as movement stirred near the doors. Staff members straightened at once, tension snapping into place. Conversations stalled. Heads turned in unison. Then the doors began to open, and the room braced itself. The doors opened without ceremony, no announcement to prepare the room, no dramatic flourish to demand attention. Yet the effect was immediate. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, laughter thinned into silence, and even the band stilled as a man stepped inside. He moved with unhurried confidence, his presence steady rather than loud, commanding without effort. He was dressed simply for the setting, tailored, precise, understated, but nothing about him felt ordinary. Power clung to him in a way that couldn't be purchased or rehearsed. It was carried in his posture, in the calm way his gaze traveled through the room, in the certainty of someone who never needed to prove who he was. His reputation arrived before his name ever could. The host noticed him instantly and hurried forward, face bright with deference that bordered on nervousness. His hand extended quickly, his voice warmer, more eager than it had been all night. This was the guest worth waiting for. Around them, guests straightened in their seats, suddenly aware of how they were standing, who they were standing near. At the center of the room, the arrogant couple froze. The husband's smirk vanished, replaced by recognition that hit like cold water. The wife's confidence flickered, then snapped into something sharper, urgency. They knew him. Everyone with ambition did. His approval could open rooms they'd never been invited into, and his disapproval could quietly close every door they relied on. They leaned forward, smiles reset, already preparing compliments and introductions that might secure his attention. But the man didn't look at them. He acknowledged the host with a brief nod, exchanged a few low words, then allowed his gaze to drift across the room. His expression remained neutral, unreadable. He wasn't impressed by the spectacle or the wealth on display. He wasn't searching for validation or applause. Then his eyes stopped. Near the edge of the room, standing alone, was the simple woman. The moment he saw her, something in his face changed, subtle, unmistakable. The tension in his shoulders eased. His focus narrowed, steady and intent. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. He walked past the center table, past the eager smiles and outstretched hands, past the arrogant couple who watched in stunned silence. And he went straight to her. He stopped in front of her, close enough that the noise of the room seemed to fade away. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her, and the shift in his demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. The edge of authority softened into something gentler, something private. He apologized quietly for being late, not with excuses, but with sincerity, as though time itself had betrayed him. She looked up at him, and for the first time that evening, her composure eased. She gave a small nod, accepting the apology without words. He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers with familiarity and care, grounding her in a way that needed no explanation. The room froze. Dozens of conversations died in unison. Glasses hovered inches from lips. Every eye locked onto the pair standing near the wall, disbelief rippling outward in waves. Someone, somewhere, whispered the word out loud, barely audible yet powerful enough to echo through the silence. Wife. At the center table, the arrogant couple went pale. The wife's smile collapsed entirely, her face stiff as though it had forgotten how to move. The husband's jaw tightened, the color draining from his features as recognition settled into dread. The meaning of the moment hit them all at once, and there was no graceful way to recover. Still holding the woman's hand, the man turned his head toward the host. His expression remained calm, his tone even, but there was weight behind every word. He asked, simply and clearly, why his wife had been standing alone when seats had been assigned. No one answered. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It pressed down on the room, forcing every guest to confront what they had witnessed and what they had chosen not to stop. The host faltered, glancing toward the center table, then back again, unable to form a response that wouldn't condemn someone. Understanding swept through the crowd like a sudden storm. The assumptions, the whispers, the quiet cruelty, all of it unraveled in an instant. The simple woman was not insignificant. She had never been. Standing there beside her husband, hand in hand, she was untouchable, and the room finally understood just how badly it had misjudged her. The man finally spoke again, his voice calm but unyielding. He asked for an explanation, not as a demand fueled by anger, but as a request that assumed the truth would be told. His gaze settled briefly on the couple at the center table, steady and assessing, as though he were already weighing the outcome. What followed was messy. The host stumbled through a version of events that skimmed the surface and avoided names. The wife interrupted, laughing too quickly, insisting it had all been a misunderstanding. She claimed she thought the seat was unassigned, that she had simply been trying to help. Her words tripped over one another, each excuse thinner than the last. The husband chimed in, offering apologies that sounded rehearsed, insisting no offense had been intended. Their confidence evaporated under scrutiny. Others were pulled into the moment, guests who had seen everything. A few spoke reluctantly, voices tight with discomfort, confirming what had happened without embellishment. Each quiet admission stripped another layer from the couple's carefully crafted image. The room listened, rapt and uneasy. The couple tried to recover. The wife reached for charm again, softening her tone, offering a brittle smile. The husband attempted humor, suggesting the whole thing had been blown out of proportion. They even gestured toward the chair, offering it back as though that single act could erase what had already been done. It didn't work. When the man responded, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult or threaten. Instead, he laid out their behavior with precision, naming it for what it was, entitlement disguised as civility, cruelty wrapped in status. His words were measured, undeniable, and impossible to laugh away. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. Guests shifted subtly away from the couple, creating space that felt deliberate. Faces that once greeted them warmly now turned guarded, distant. Invitations, alliances, opportunities, unseen but essential, began to slip out of reach. The seat was offered back again, hurriedly this time. But the moment had passed. Some things, once revealed, could not be undone. At last, the simple woman spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and unmistakably sure of itself. There was no tremor, no hesitation, no need to raise it to command attention. The room leaned in without realizing it. When she addressed the situation, she did not accuse or defend. She simply stated what had happened and what it had revealed, her words chosen with care and restraint. She declined the seat. Not out of pride, and not out of defiance, but because accepting it now would have meant participating in something she had already risen above. She explained that respect, once stripped away, could not be restored by a gesture. Her tone remained gentle, but each sentence landed with quiet force, cutting deeper than anger ever could. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only clarity. Shame moved through the crowd in slow waves. Guests who had laughed, looked away, or stayed silent felt it settle heavily in their chests. No one spoke. No one dared to justify themselves. The truth had been laid bare without cruelty, and it was impossible to ignore. The arrogant couple stood apart now, isolated without being singled out. People edged away from them instinctively, conversations dissolving before reaching their table. No one needed to humiliate them further. Their discomfort was complete, visible, and entirely self-made. The man beside the woman removed his coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, shielding her not from the cold, but from the weight of the room. The gesture was intimate, protective, final. He offered her his arm, and she took it without a word. Together, they turned and walked toward the exit. They did not rush. They did not look back. Behind them, the party remained frozen in quiet reckoning. Ahead of them, there was nothing to prove. They left unbothered, unbroken, carrying a power no one there could take away. The party carried on, at least in appearance. Music resumed, Glasses were refilled, and laughter returned in fragments, but the atmosphere had shifted beyond repair. The sparkle that once filled the room dulled into something artificial. Conversations felt thinner now, careful and restrained, as though everyone feared saying the wrong thing in a space that had just revealed its true nature. People spoke in hushed tones, revisiting the incident without ever naming it directly. It became a lesson passed quietly from one guest to another, wrapped in vague language and meaningful glances. Some framed it as gossip, others as caution. All of them understood that something important had been exposed, and it had nothing to do with money. The arrogant couple remained, but only in body. The room no longer leaned toward them. Invitations that might have been extended later that night never came. Smiles faded into polite distance. The fall was subtle, almost invisible, but it was undeniable. Their social downfall did not begin with shouting or confrontation, it began with absence. And absence, in their world, was fatal. Outside, the night was calm. The couple who had walked out together moved through the quiet streets in silence, hands intertwined, the city lights sliding past their windows. There was no need to discuss what had happened. No need to revisit the cruelty or the revelation. What mattered had already been understood between them. They drove on, untouched by the room they had left behind, carrying with them a truth few inside would ever forget. True power, after all, does not announce itself. It does not demand attention, nor does it humiliate to assert dominance. And dignity, real dignity, never waits for permission.